Hello, BookTube. I have a tag for you today on this Tag Tuesday. Beautiful, beautiful day here in Boston, at least outside the home. Inside the home, there are sparking old electrical wires, pipes that go nowhere and carry God knows what, flaking asbestos, enough to suit a whole family. Endless noise, hammering, carpeting, and hits of the 90s on the radio, played at maximum volume because I managed to get the only work crew in the entire world that doesn't have earbuds. But outside, it's a beautiful day, and since it's Tuesday, that's a tag event on BookTube, and there's a tag that I've seen. It's been going around. I don't think anyone has tagged me, even though I knew personally and had conjugal relations with 3 of the 7 people in the tag. The tag is the 6 Tudor Queens book tag, and so you know what's coming. It's all about King Henry VIII and his wives. It was created by Gem of Books, and I'll leave a link to that original post down below. And the prompts go in strict chronological order. Number 1 being Queen Katherine of Aragon. A book that was your first love. And she was Henry's first love. But the problem is that she was also his brother's first love. And there's a lot of speculation going on as to what was going wrong here. The latest historical medical speculation, of course we can't ever know, but the latest speculation is that the problem was Henry, who had a very specific condition that caused his children to miscarry after the first one. So that he could, if he, let's say subject X, could impregnate a woman, and the woman would bring the child to term, and the child would be healthy and live. But all children after that would not be healthy and would not live. One way or the other, Katherine Aragon was his first love, and the question is a book that was your first love, and for me, that is the Iliad. Not necessarily the first book that I read, but the first book that I knew I could love. The first book where I knew that loving a book was possible, that loving reading was possible. Then prompt number 2 is Anne Boleyn, a book with a manipulative character. I've seen all sorts of sidelong reactions to these prompts going around as I've watched the people who have been doing this tag. It seems like there's a lot of fugitive love out there for Anne Boleyn. Let's nip that right in the bud, okay? She was Satan incarnate. She was purely evil. But she was also, I mean, the tag doesn't assert that. The tag at least implies that she was manipulative, and she sure was. She was as manipulative as the day is long. And the book that I have in mind here is the 1-volume abridgment of Ian Kershaw's 2-volume biography of Hitler, which I think really underscores that as an aspect of how he dealt with the rest of the world. We don't think of it that way. We think of Hitler as being just bootlessly insane, a carpet biter, someone who got what he wanted through bullying people or being completely irrational or just bald-faced lying. But there was a lot of manipulation involved for a long time, long after he became undisputed God Emperor of his country, with the power of literal life and death over anyone, anywhere around him at any time for any reason. Long even after that, there's a distinct element of manipulation involved in everything he did. So I'm going to say that, and I recently reread, this year, not recently, but earlier this year, I reread that 1-volume abridgment. I sure as hell wasn't going to reread the 2 big volumes on their own. But I reread that. It's a really skillful abridgment, and of a very good biography. It's the same problem that I have that I've always mentioned with biographies of monsters, is that the good job that the biographer does is often overshadowed by the sheer grueling horror of spending that much time with a psychopath. But I do recommend it if you're looking for something. But anyway, prompt number 3, of course, if we're going in chronological order, is Jane Seymour. And the prompt, pricelessly, is a book that delivered what you wanted. Of course, referring to the fact that Henry wanted a legitimate male heir. And Catherine had failed to give him that. She'd given him a daughter, and then as many as half a dozen other children who were stillborn, or lived a day, or lived a week, or heartbreakingly lived a month, and then died. All of them, including the boy who would have been that heir. There would have been no Protestant Revolution. There would have been no Church of England. There would have been no nothing like that. There would have been no gaudy parade of wives. Katherine of Aragon did deliver a baby boy to Henry. The whole of London was cheering. But such was not to be. But in terms of a book that delivered what you wanted, I picked one that's just on my mind. I just read it. I don't know that it's out yet. I don't think that it is. It's called Creepy Crayon. It's by Aaron Reynolds with art by Peter Brown. And it's the second or third book in a series of creepy kids books that are so good. The first one, I believe, was the one that won me over completely from a few years ago, called The Haunted Underwear, The Haunted Underpants. And this is the Creepy Crayon. Basically what the series is taking the fixtures of a little kid's world, whether it's underpants or crayons or anything else, and infusing them with demonic spirits, which you might think would be unhealthy, but oh my God, kids love it. They absolutely love it. And I loved Creepy Crayon. I loved it. I think it's coming out this summer. If you are in the market for really fun kids books, in other words, you parents out there, kids books that you won't mind reading 100 times, because you know you're going to. You could do a lot worse than to pick any of the books in this series. Then prompt number 4 is Anne of Cleves, and that is a book that wasn't what you expected. Again, referring famously to the fact that Hans Holbein, the painter, the famous painter, went over to Europe to paint Anne of Cleves, caught her in the best moment of her life, added a little bit of artistic license, and then brought that painting back to Henry. There was no Snapchats, no Instagram, no photographs, no nothing like that. Henry needed to know, he knew the strategic value of the alliance, but he wanted to know what the woman looked like. And she didn't look like what Hans Holbein painted her as. It's kind of amazing to me, even now. After all, Henry was, of course, besotted. You see that painting, you'll be besotted too. And made the long, arduous journey, he wasn't in the best of health, to go, and he was eager to meet his bride. He said, I'm a boy again. I'm eager to meet my bride. And no one could tell him no. No one could say, you're not a boy anymore. Put on a ridiculous disguise. There was no doubt in anyone's mind, most especially hers, who she was dealing with. But one way or the other, it always amazes me. I mean, Henry was very nice to Anne of Cleves. He immediately dissolved their union, but he was very nice to her. Gave her a generous pension, gave her generous honors. What amazes me is that he let Holbein live. I would have thought that in the state of Henry's mentality when all this happened, I would have thought that the generosity of his terms towards Anne of Cleves would have been in inverse proportion to how draconian he would have been towards the man who made the mistake happen. But that never happened either. Henry was unpredictable. And for me, a book that wasn't what you expected, I picked Maya Jasnoff's book, Liberty's Exiles, which is a really great work of history about loyalists during the American Revolution. Well over 50% of the population living in the 13 colonies did not want the revolution. They did not want to break from England. Well over 50%. The number might be closer to 70%. Americans don't like to tell themselves that, but it's nevertheless true. And a lot of those loyalists, I mean, plenty of them, got news, that George Washington had assembled 1,000 scraggly teenagers on Cambridge Common, and that was the Continental Army. And a lot of them behind their sleeves laughed at the idea that this was going to be anything. There would be punitive taxation, there would be punishment, but there wouldn't be a successful revolution. And even after the revolution, a lot of them just trimmed their sails and sailed by the new winds. I didn't make any overt declarations one way or another for king and country during the American Revolution, and I'm pretty sure I can get on with my neighbors now that I know the way things are going to go. But quite a few of them did not. Quite a few of them left, or were thrown out, or run out of this new country, or even when the country was born, when the revolution was still happening. And what I expected from Liberty's Exiles would be unwarrantedly sympathetic portraits of these people, who were willing to continue being servile subjects of the crown instead of throwing in with liberty, with freedom. And instead, she made me like them. Maya Jasnoff made me like them. She made me sympathize with a lot of them. That was unexpected. I didn't think any author could do that. A couple of authors in the previous 50 years have tried and failed, but she succeeds. So I recommend Liberty's Exiles. Then the number 5, right on schedule, is Katherine Howard, the youngest and by a wide margin the dumbest of Henry's wives. A book that irritated you. And I wouldn't say here so much. that Katherine Howard irritated Henry. Henry, by this point in his life, was irritated by literally everyone around him at one point or another in any given day. Katherine wasn't all that irritating, but she was spectacularly indiscreet. Sexually. That's not so much irritation as it is towering moral outrage. What should have happened didn't. The Howard family, the Duke of Norfolk, they prided themselves on taking control of their womenfolk. Their womenfolk were heavy barter for them and had been for well over a generation. The idea in the Howard family was, this is our second bite at the apple. Anne Boleyn failed disastrously. This is our second chance at the throne. So we're absolutely not going to blow it. And yet they botched the thing right from the beginning. They should have known right beforehand that Katherine was tainted goods. And that even if she were tainted goods, they should have known she could never bring off hiding that fact. And so they came close to complete ruin. But so I wouldn't say that Henry was irritated with Katherine. I think the plan probably was wait a little while, carefully time things so that it's right before a long progress. Henry used to go on long progresses into the countryside. Carefully time things. Get someone to impregnate Katherine. Henry was not physically able to do it. By the time he married her, he was not physically able to impregnate her. And the child, oh my God, would certainly not have been viable. I think the plan was probably wait until he's on the eve of a long progress where he's going to leave her in London as a regent. Get her with child by someone who roughly looks like Henry did when he was in his 20s, and then, let things take their course. Before Henry went on his progress, he would probably have dallied with Katherine. He would probably have been drunk. He would not have been able to do the deed, but he might not have remembered that. It would be easy. It would have been easy for all parties, including Henry and his famously fragile ego, to just say, yes, I got a fertile young wife, and here's my son. That, to put it mildly, had been done before in British royal history. But that didn't happen. Instead, the whole thing spectacularly went wrong. And for me, a book that irritated you, again, irritation is the wrong word. Again, it is towering moral outrage. And it also is a book that I don't think is out yet. Jared Kushner, the odious son-in-law of Donald Trump, of course, wrote a book. And he managed to find a fascist publisher in America. So it's coming out this summer. I don't think it's out yet. It might be a July release. But I got a copy of it and read it, and it's like picture that a cartoonishly evil version of Cardinal Richelieu sustained a traumatic head injury so that he was really, really overweening and arrogant, but really stupid, and then wrote his memoirs. That's what this book is like. A person who, it's the memoir of someone who thinks that he is pretty much the smartest person who has ever lived. And who is not only really dumb, but glow-in-the-dark evil. So the book tremendously irritated me. I'll be probably talking more about it when closer we get to its pub date. Then number 6 is Katherine Parr, my own favorite of the wives of Henry VIII, and the first English woman to publish a book under her own name. And the prompt is a book published after the death of the author. And, of course, a slew of posthumous books come to mind. One that comes to mind because I just recently reread it is Morris by Ian Forrester. Forrester wrote this explicitly gay novel at a time when that was still a criminal offense met with hard labor in his own country, and was still a criminal offense in most of the country, or in the more enlightened parts of the world. A serious psychological ailment. So not a lifestyle, certainly, not an identity. There were parts of America where if you had come out, as the saying goes now, as gay, you would have been quietly bundled off to receive severe psychiatric treatment and drugs. You certainly it wouldn't have been that your friends say, so I guess you'll be marrying soon. That wouldn't have happened. And if you're tempted to get all smug about that, especially if you're an American, don't. Of course, don't. Because gay marriage is going to be struck down next year. so that this country will be illegal state by state. It will be a state decision as to whether or not it's legal for you to marry. And if you're in a state where you got married because the U.S. Supreme Court said you could get married, in a famous case, just a handful of years ago, if you got married in a state where the Supreme Court said you could, but the state legislature is hostile to that, the state legislature will annul your marriage, and there go your kids. So it's not just that. It's not just that the Supreme Court is certainly going to do that. It's certainly going to do that. It's also that, I mean, the Republican Party in Texas just had their Republican convention, where they lay out the planks of their party platform, and one of them is that gay people are an abomination in the sight of God. The Republicans control Texas. So, you know, and also, I know other commentators have pointed this out, and I don't mean to make this a political video, but if you don't think that the Texas Republican Party's platform isn't a harbinger of things to come in the broader country, you're nuts. It is, certainly, a blueprint of broader things to come. So when I comment that Ian Forrester knew that Morris couldn't be published in his lifetime, he said, I don't want this published in my lifetime. It's not with any sanctimony. That pendulum is about to swing back hard, I think. But once Forrester died, the book was published, and it's tremendously good. It really is. I mean, I have a Penguin Classic right here on the wall here, and an ebook. If you haven't read it, I definitely recommend it. I recommend all of Forrester. And then the final prompt, of course, he had to show up, right? Even though the tag is called the Six Tudor Queens book tag, Henry had to show up. So the final prompt is Henry VIII, a chunky book that you hated. And I'm, of course, going to get a little sentimental, even at the end. I didn't hate Henry. He had definite charisma. It was hard to hate him. But he was hateable. So, and for here, of course, hate is a strong word. It's one of my favorite words, but it's a strong word. I'm going to choose Under the Dome by Stephen King. I could choose any of a number of chunky books that Stephen King wrote. He flubs them all. But Under the Dome has such a rock-solid premise. Stephen King is best at writing about small communities and small towns. Under the Dome has a small community in a small town, and not only that, but he puts them in a petri dish. He seals them off from the rest of the world. That's a great gimmick. What would happen if that happened? Unfortunately, he goes right for the most predictable routes, and of course, in any book that has an impenetrable dome suddenly surround a little town, no matter how long the book is, Under the Dome is like 1,500 pages long, no matter how long the book is, you're going to want to explain the dome at the end, right? And Stephen King does. And oh my God, if you don't feel just schnookered, just cashiered by the ending of that, by the big reveal at the end of that book, if you don't feel like you've been made a fool of, you're made of sturdier stuff than I am. It was on my mind for a chunky book that you hated, because more than any other chunky books by Stephen King, it could have been really good. If he had any idea how to write, any idea at all, if he'd learned anything in 50 years of writing, given such a premise and the cast of characters that he comes up with, virtually anyone could have made a classic novel out of that premise. If he'd learned anything in his entire career, he would have been able to do it. But instead, no, not at all. He's no more capable of writing a good novel than the organ grinder's monkey is of playing the organ. He knows just a few sawing motions, and he sets up a premise, no matter how good or bad it is, he sets up a premise and then just goes to work, sawing away on the one little tin bow saw that he has in his toolkit. And you say to him, well, okay, that's your only bow saw. What about the other tools in your toolkit? And he just says, I've only got the one tool. And it isn't more than 50 pages in Under the Dome before you start to suspect that, oh my God, is he just going to do his old shticks? All of them? He's not going to try anything new? He's not going to dig any deeper for this thing? Even though the hardcover is costing me $30? And then by page 300, you're thinking, okay, no, he's not going to realize this in any way. He's just going to do his shtick. So that was chunky book that I hated. And that was the 6 Tudor Queens book tag here on the little Lenovo, which I found in my dislocated tech cabinet. I have a tech cabinet. I had one. It's gone now. The whole wall that it was in is gone now, and the tech had to be relocated elsewhere. And I was thinking, you know, I'd kind of like to find my iPad mini. I have an old second generation iPad mini. I'd kind of like to find it and check in on it, see what it's like, see why I abandoned using it. Was it really slow? Did it not get Wi-Fi if it wasn't right on top of the modem? What was the reason? I couldn't find the iPad mini. I'm sure it's here somewhere. There's been quite a bit of dislocation, but I did find this little Lenovo thing. And I think this was a gift from one of you. And I was looking around. I charged it up, and I was looking around it and thinking, okay, why did you stop using this? This is better than all but the newest iPad mini. Is it just a brand name? Is this the Apple brand name? Could you be that shallow? Of course I'm not, right? I'm a sexy influencer. I'm not allowed to be shallow. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up before the drilling starts again. I'm very glad that I got to make at least this video. I will keep making videos during any kind of quiet spots until the sun goes down. So I might see you later. Thank you, BookTube.